Hello there and welcome to this session on adversity and enterprise, where we're specifically going to be looking at institutional theory. So as our very first learning outcome for this session, by the end of the session you will have developed an understanding of institutional theory. Before we begin our foray into institutional theory, please make sure that you completed your essential reading for this topic. In particular, I need you to have read the brief overview or introduction to institutional theory. If you haven't done this so far, please go back now and do it. It's really important. If you have, great, we can move on. So how can we define the theory? Well, we can take North's definition there of the rules of the game. But what are rules? Well, our understanding of rules varies according to the discipline. And institutional theory has been applied to a range of different disciplines. So, for example, economics focuses on more tangible rules. In sociology, intangible rules become more important. Scott's work of 2008 becomes really important here. He was writing about something called pillars. Now, first of all, he identifies regulative pillars. These are laws, rules, tangible legislation, for example. Secondly, he defines normative pillars as behavioural in basis. These are expected norms of behaviour. And thirdly, there are rules that are embedded at a cultural cognitive sense. What this means is that there are shared values, expectations, and these are embedded cognitively. So, in terms of our key principles, and assuming that you've done your essential reading, let me ask you the following question. What are the key principles of institutional theory? Now, make sure that you've got this right in your head, because you may find it important for your test. So why is the theory so important? Well, it's important to you because it's so useful. It's incredibly useful because it's so flexible. It can be used to describe any behaviour, macro levels, meso levels and micro levels. So it can be used to explain, for example, societal trends, organisational behaviour, or even the behaviour of individuals. It's a theory that's been extensively and historically grounded in research. There's lots of empirical support for it, and it's very rich and varied in its dynamics. So let's take a look at some of this research now, and let's explore a case study by Hyatt et al. In 1999. Now, their paper is called Pabst to Pepsi, and you can find a copy of this in your Topic 8 folder on Learn. They were looking at purposefully created disruption as adversity. More specifically, they were looking at how social movements can, first of all, break down existing institutional arrangements. In other words, these social movements were challenging existing norms and behaviour that were around in society at a particular time. They also looked at how social movements can contribute to industry failure. And secondly, how they enabled entrepreneurial activity. So these social movements, having challenged existing social norms and behaviour, they also contributed towards the failing of a specific industry. And in that industry failure, it made space for entrepreneurs to create their own rival products. But let me go a bit slower and let me tell you the story of Hyatt's paper. Okay, so in Pabst to Pepsi, Hyatt et al. Described the Women's Christian Temperance Movement. And this was a social movement, and it was around between 1870 and 1920 in the United States. So it was grown as a local organisation, and it grew and grew and grew to be a major force with a political agenda. And this political agenda was anti-alcohol. So its main agenda was to stop the buying and selling of alcoholic drinks. It aggressively targeted breweries, but also the public. So to the public, it suggested they take something called the pledge. And the pledge was merely a promise that they would sustain from alcohol consumption. They also used a huge amount of emotion towards children, for example, in their marketing campaigns. And I think we can see a couple of examples next. So you can see here one of the posters that they used to use. So you can see there, wet or dry. Now, wet just means that you are drinking alcohol. Dry means that you are abstaining from alcohol. So on the left-hand side, you can see the very fat, rich brewer there. And on the right-hand side, you can see the poor family with children who are threatened by this sale of liquor or alcohol. It says there, shall the mothers and children be sacrificed to the financial greed of the liquor traffic? It's up to you, voter, to decide. Vote dry. So huge amounts of emotionality there. So this is an example of a pledge. So people wanting to abstain from alcohol and to document and sort of authorise their abstinence from alcohol could sign this, and they would be given a copy, and that would be theirs to prove that they are dry and clean of all alcoholic consumption. Another example here of the emotionality used towards children in their marketing campaign. So, help me to keep him pure. Please vote against the sale of liquors. In other words, if you don't vote for this agenda, then you are damaging and harming children in some way. So this is my personal favourite. It is the Devil's Toboggan slide, and it basically depicts the slow sort of descent into an alcoholic hell. So we start off at the left-hand side there, right at the top, where you might start drinking in a popular hotel or a drugstore, and then you pretty much start to frequent saloons, and you slowly degenerate down into this gambling hell, corruption, and eventually into drunkards' graves. So what kind of effect did these marketing campaigns and the social movement as a whole have on the consumption of alcohol? Well, it did change the norms and beliefs surrounding alcohol. So basically, the institutions of breweries were changed. So the social movement, the pressure of the social movement, de-institutionalised the role of the breweries. The rules surrounding breweries and alcohol consumption became broken down and fragmented. And we can see this by looking at some statistics. Consumption of alcohol dropped by over 5.5 million gallons between 1873 and 1875. That's only 2 years. And in that 2 years, 750 breweries were destroyed. And you can see here the main political outcome. It says here, this is a copy of the American issue of 1919, and it's saying that the US is voted dry. The 36th state ratifies dry amendment on the January the 16th. So, as we've said, the rules surrounding drinking behaviour and alcohol consumption are fragmented and broken at this point. But what that has done is created new opportunities for soft drink entrepreneurs. So it's created institutional space. So the rules or institutions have been broken down to an extent that there's no longer a strong alcoholic drinking behaviour. So now we've got a situation where there are opportunities for soft drink entrepreneurs. And maybe the most successful of these soft drink entrepreneurs was Coca-Cola. Now, Coca-Cola was around 1886, and it was Candler that brought the soft drink first to the market. However, the enterprise was helped significantly, albeit indirectly, by the events and the agenda and the marketing campaign of the Women's Christian Temperance Union. How? Well, they created a market pull. Remember, breweries and alcoholic drinks and consumption generally were out of fashion. They were in decline. But people still needed to drink something. So that's why soft drinks could fill the void. So a market pull was created and entrepreneurs were educated. And the demand was stimulated via education. So the breweries were delegitimised and they were deinstitutionalised, and most importantly, maybe, that Coca-Cola adhered itself and its marketing campaign very closely to that of the Women's Christian Temperance Union. And you can see there that one of their first straplines or slogans was, "Drink Coca-Cola, the great national temperance drink, delicious and refreshing." But other soft drink entrepreneurs and enterprises followed. So we had Pepsi Cola, we had Moxie, we had Dr. Pepper and some others. By the year 1900, there were 2,763 soft drink companies, and combined they were producing a revenue of around $23 million, which was a huge amount of money at that particular time. Just 19 years later, in 1919, that revenue had risen to $135 million. Again, a huge amount of money. Some companies that were incredibly clever remarketed their products to align themselves more with alcoholic drinks at that time. How did that work, you may ask? Well, for example, XXX, they used to make something called Root Tea. And in 1918, they renamed their product into Root Beer. Now, this Root Beer contained no alcohol whatsoever, but the idea was to capture the market that still liked the idea of alcohol consumption, but kind of felt they couldn't consume alcohol because of the events of the Women's Christian Temperance Union and that alcohol and breweries were so out of fashion. So we have a position then of deinstitutionalization. Breweries and alcohol in general, the norms surrounding those have broken down. And that makes it impossible for products and organisations, i.e. alcohol and breweries, that operate on the old, weakened norms, i.e. alcohol consumption is good, to defend their market space. Now, also on Learn, you'll find a copy of the paper by Sinney and Lee in 2009. They were writing in a very similar vein and did a historical study on the Sierra Club and the Audubon Society and how they influenced entrepreneurs in wind and electric power as new energy sources. And they detail how they created market push and market pull factors as social movements. So at this point, let me pause and ask you a question. How do you think the concept of isomorphism relates to this case study of Pabst to Pepsi? And if you've read it, to the case study of Sinney and Lee, which documents new energy?